There was a time when I had 2 job interviews lined up in North Carolina. I was living in New York then and decided to drive there instead of flying, hoping to save some money. My job at the time was far from ideal, and these new opportunities promised a much-needed fresh start. The positions were in a corporate office, offering numerous benefits, attractive salaries, and a more pleasant climate compared to New York. On a Thursday night, I set out on my journey. I had taken the following day off work for the interviews, which were both scheduled for Friday. After a busy day at work, I rushed home to grab my suitcase and say goodbye to my family before hitting the road. The drive ahead was long, over 8 hours. My plan was to arrive in the early hours of the morning, around 2 o'clock. In the first few hours, I relied on about 3 cups of coffee to stay awake. Initially, the drive was manageable, but as time passed, exhaustion began to creep in. The previous night had been restless due to pre-interview anxiety, and after a full day at work, the last thing I wanted was an 8-hour drive. Late into the night, with about 2 hours left to drive, the road was almost empty. Out of nowhere, I spotted a man in a suit standing still on the side of the road, staring straight at my car. As I drove past, his head turned to follow my vehicle. I muttered to myself, "What on earth was that?" It was unsettling. For a moment, I considered turning back to see if he needed help. I imagined scenarios to distract myself from the fatigue, wondering if he had been thrown out of a car after a fight. About 10 minutes later, I encountered another man in a suit standing on the shoulder of the road. My curiosity piqued, and I slowed down to see if he needed assistance. As I was about to pull over, I glanced in the rearview mirror and then turned around completely. He had vanished. Panic set in, and I sped off, determined to find a place for more coffee. I still had around 90 minutes of driving left. Stopping at a gas station, I bought a coffee and took a few sips, trying to shake off the unease. While sitting in the gas station parking lot, I saw another man in a suit. This time, his face was clear. He was a middle-aged white man with short dark brown hair and a clean-shaven face, wearing a neutral expression. Fear gripped me as he stared directly at my car. I started the engine and drove off without looking back. I desperately wanted to finish the drive, but the coffee wasn't helping. Exhaustion was taking over. I pulled off the highway into a random parking lot, reclined my seat, and attempted to sleep. Despite my fatigue, fear kept me awake. I was terrified that if I opened my eyes, I would see the man in the suit again. Just as I was drifting off, a sudden jolt made me open my eyes. My mind was playing tricks on me. I checked every window and the front windshield, seeing nothing unusual. Then, I looked in the rearview mirror and felt my heart stop. There he was, sitting in the back seat. I screamed, bolted out of the car, and fell to the ground, still screaming. When I finally gathered the courage to look inside, the back seat was empty. Reality hit me. I had been hallucinating due to extreme exhaustion. I needed sleep desperately, but now I was too awake and scared to rest. I got back in the car, finished my coffee, and drove the remaining distance. When I finally reached the hotel, I collapsed onto the bed and fell asleep instantly. The next morning, I had my first interview at 11 o'clock. Despite not getting much sleep, I felt slightly refreshed. However, when the interviewer came out to greet me, I froze. He looked exactly like the man in the suit from my hallucinations. He noticed my shock, which set a nervous tone for the rest of the interview. It felt surreal, like a bad dream. I left that interview feeling disoriented and had only an hour to prepare for the next one. Thankfully, the next interviewer was a woman, and I performed much better with her. I got the job and now live in North Carolina. My old therapist suggested that the stress of preparing for the interviews, combined with lack of sleep, caused the hallucinations. Imagining my interviewer as a man in a suit seemed plausible. Despite this rational explanation, the experience was genuinely terrifying. One night, As I navigated the empty roads of Santa Catarina, Brazil, past midnight to dodge traffic, a beep from my car interrupted my podcast, signaling low fuel. Reluctantly, I mapped the nearest gas station, which appeared a few miles ahead. The desolate stretch of road was flanked by dense woods, adding to the eerie solitude. Upon arriving, I parked beside a pump at a nameless, run-down gas station. Another customer, a man with an old, battered truck, eyed me as I entered the dimly lit store. I grabbed a coffee and paid for my fuel with cash, sensing his gaze following me. As I walked out, he was just driving away. Back on the road, I hadn't driven a minute when I spotted the same truck parked off the road, partially hidden by the woods. The sight unsettled me, but I pressed on, keeping an eye on my rearview mirror. Soon, another alert from my car, this time, a low tire pressure warning. The sound confirmed my fear, a flat tire. I pulled over and inspected the damage, a completely flat rear tire on the driver's side. Confused about what caused it, I began searching for my roadside assistance number. I then heard an engine but saw no headlights. The darkness around me was impenetrable, heightening my anxiety as the engine noise abruptly ceased. Fetching a flashlight from my trunk, a gift from my dad, I saw the reflection of headlights about 200 feet away. It was that same truck. My heart raced as I grabbed the flashlight and ran into the forest, hiding behind a tree. I watched as the man emerged from the truck, something glinting in his hand. Moonlight revealed a knife. Terrified, I saw him approach my car, his knife scraping against the glass, followed by a heavy thud. He then moved to the trunk, attempting to break in. My pulse pounded as I crouched lower behind the tree. After a tense few minutes, the sound of an engine revving signaled his departure. I waited before cautiously returning to my car. The trunk was dented, the rear window scratched. I immediately called the police, detailing my location and the ordeal. Locking all doors, I anxiously awaited their arrival. Within 20 minutes, a patrol arrived, assisting with my flat tire and escorting me to safety. Later, I discovered that several motorists had been robbed in that area by a man matching his description. The encounter left me shaken, and since then, I've avoided late-night drives, ensuring my car is always in top condition to prevent such harrowing stops. I found myself navigating a secluded, rural stretch in the heart of Brazil on a pitch-black, moonless night. The evening had been filled with laughter and beer at a friend's house, and in my slightly inebriated state, I opted for a shortcut home, a dirt road weaving through a dense forest. Moments after committing to this path, regret crept in. The road was a nightmare, riddled with potholes and strewn with fallen branches. To make matters worse, my fuel gauge hovered precariously close to empty. As I crept along, a chilling sensation enveloped me, a nagging feeling of being watched. Glancing around, I saw only the oppressive shadows of trees and undergrowth. I pressed on, trying to shake off the eerie sensation. Suddenly, the car emitted a disturbing noise and coasted to a halt. Attempts to revive the engine were futile. There I sat, engulfed in the forest's stifling silence. Reluctantly, I exited the vehicle to inspect the engine, despite my lack of mechanical prowess. Using my phone's flashlight, I peered under the hood. That's when I heard it, footsteps emanating from the darkness. I froze, straining to pinpoint their source. The steps grew louder, closer. Straining to pinpoint their source. The steps grew louder, closer. Panicking, I scrambled back into the car, locking the doors behind me. The footsteps ceased abruptly, leaving only my own ragged breaths audible. Desperately, I dialed a nearby friend for help. While waiting for him to pick up, a movement caught my eye. A tall, slender figure cloaked in darkness stood before my car, motionless yet unnerving. My heart pounded fiercely. The figure remained still, observing me. A shiver ran down my spine. When my friend finally answered, I quickly relayed my predicament. He urged me to stay inside, assuring me he was on his way with reinforcements. I kept my eyes glued to the figure, which didn't budge. An eternity seemed to pass, but it was only about half an hour when my friend's headlights pierced the gloom. The eerie figure vanished as abruptly as it had appeared. My friends arrived, and together we managed to coax my car back to life. They escorted me home, ensuring my safe arrival. The identity of that figure remains a mystery, a haunting memory that lingers. Since that night, I vowed never to take that road again after dark and to always maintain my car meticulously, avoiding such vulnerable situations in the future.